Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Northshire Presents event. This is our second to last event of 2021. Thank you all so much for being here with us through these crazy months that we've been doing these virtual events. It's lovely to have you here with us. For those of you who don't know me, I am Rachel Person. I am the event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Saratoga Springs, New York, here as I usually am these days with my good friend and colleague, David Wood, event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Manchester, Vermont. Just quickly before we get started, a note. As you come in, you probably see that we are recording this evening's event for later broadcast on our YouTube channel. However, we have the settings arranged so that only those of us who are unmuted and speaking in these lovely yellow boxes that you see around me will appear in that recording. So you can have your video on and you will not be picked up for posterity. In light of that, please use the chat throughout the evening for any comments or questions that you might have. We'll be keeping an eye on that and we can answer questions as we see them. We will also be putting into the chat, I think David will put it there in just a moment, a link to a blog post that lists all of the titles that are being discussed this evening, so you can follow along from home and see them there. We might not have books to hold up for all of them, so you can follow along there and you can place orders on our website for them if you like. You can also come on in and shop in the stores. A note about holiday shipping. Orders shipped to home this year are taking even longer than usual. There are shenanigans at the post office and weird supply chain issues. The books we're talking about tonight are all in stock in one store or another or both. Books being ordered in from out of the stores. There are plenty of them that we can still get for Christmas, but some that we cannot. So if you're looking for Christmas shopping in particular, at this point, your best bet is to place orders for in-store pickup or come into the stores or call us and talk there. That's all the boring stuff, I think. And I'm going to hand things over to David.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And yes, welcome everybody. I've got the link in the chat. Let me put it up again, just in case anyone came in subsequently. You can also find it in perpetuity if you go to northshire.com and click on Notes from the Shire. That leads to the blog, and it leads to all of these things that we've been doing for a couple of years now. Well, first up, it's Claire Bennett. She sells books. She's a bookseller on the adult and the children's floor. Claire, tell us about the books you've been reading.
All right, so I am primarily a children's book seller, so I have mostly children's books. So we're going to start with this, which is my new favorite picture book. It's called Dragons Are the Worst by Alex Willan. This is a sequel to Unicorns Are the Worst, which is one of my favorite picture books. These are really fun ones for kids who like to have like a story. They're not listy picture books. There's an actual story involved. And they have a surprising amount of world building in them. So if you are looking to get kids sort of interested in fantasy or more adventure type books, this is a great place to start. I don't love this one quite as much as Unicorns Are the Worst. I don't think that there will ever be a book that's quite as good as Unicorns Are the Worst, but this is a worthy sequel. So most of what I have here is young adult. This one is called The Nobleman's Guide to Scandal and Shipwrecks by Mackenzie Lee. This is just out. It is the third book in the Montague siblings series, which I read and loved the first two, and it was anticipating this one for quite a while. It got fairly pushed back due to pandemic related reasons, but it's out now. The Montague siblings series is really great, like sort of adventure, the era of discovery historical fiction, but it's much more inclusive than a lot of the classic stuff. And it has just the barest sprinkling of magical realism in it, which I found really intriguing. It's enough that you could kind of explain it away, I guess, but it's still enough to give it a little bit extra. Like, I wouldn't classify this as hard historical fiction. It's more sort of fantastical, but beautifully written. These are great series for ambitious readers. And if you're looking for diverse representation in historical fiction, this is a great place to start. This is another young adult title. It's called The Dark Tide by Alicia Jasinska. I picked this up just sort of on a lark and ended up really enjoying it. It's another fairly new one. I would describe this one as a dark fairy tale. You can see it's really pretty thin. I read this in, I don't know, 4 hours. So quick read, but beautiful world building. This is a very unique book. So if you have somebody who likes fantasy but has read pretty much everything that's out, this is a great thing to surprise them with, because it's fairly unknown and it's also really different. It is about this island nation where the tide rises every year and is slowly consuming the town. And in order to keep the tide at bay, the witch queen who guides who is the guardian of the town has to sacrifice a human life every year, but she has to fall in love with the person she sacrifices first. And so it takes place from the point of view of a girl. The boy she has a crush on is chosen to be the sacrifice this year. And so she decides she's going to sail out to the water palace and save him. So yeah, great adventure. I really enjoyed this one. This is The Starlight Claim by Tim Wynne Jones. This was another really unexpected treasure. I just liked the premise when it came into the store, and it's one of my favorite things that I've read in a long time. If you've ever read a separate piece, this feels like sort of a worthy modern companion to that. It is about a young boy whose family owns a lake house at this really remote lake. And the summer before the book takes place, his best friend drowned in a horrific boating accident and his body was never found. So the main character, Nathan, decides that he has to go out to the lake house and find the body. But when he gets to the cabin, he discovers that some escaped convicts from the local jail are hiding out in his family cabin. And so it's about what he does in that situation. It's very tense, good survival tale, but it's also written in a way that's appropriate for younger audiences. So if you're looking for something a little more cerebral, this is a great pick for that. And again, pretty thin, pretty much any advanced reader will blow right through it, but it really stays with you. This is called The Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. She's one of my favorite authors. She has a series called The Merciful Crow, which is some of the best fantasy I've ever read. The Little Thieves is a new book and a new world with a totally different character. I haven't finished this one yet, but it's really intriguing. I would recommend this one if you or someone you know really enjoys ambitious fantasy, really wants to sink your teeth into something and lose yourself in a lush new world. This is a great one to go with. And so now I have 2 adult titles on my roster that I've been working on. This one is called The 10 Equations That Rule the World by David Sumter. This is just a fun little book. It's not my usual fare, but I thought the title was really intriguing. And so it's about 10 equations that are used through all facets of life, and that are sort of working behind the scenes to sort of create the world that we live in today. I'm not finished with it yet, but I really enjoyed, they talk about the influencer equation, which is what they use to determine your profile on social media, like the videos that you watch on YouTube. And it shows essentially how people become numbers. and how that can be used for both good and bad. So reading this book, and I'm a lay audience, which is what this book is for. If you happen to be a mathematician, there's probably not a lot to glean from this. But for someone like me, it was very informative. Just a really little interesting look into under the hood of our modern world. So this is called Atomic Habits by James Clear. This has been out for a while, but I wanted to include it because if I were to say life-changing book, I would think of this first. This book really has made measurable improvements in my life. The basic premise is that habit building is something that has to start small. And it's called Atomic Habits because he talks about changes that are as tiny as atoms. He has this concept that he introduces throughout the book of the notion of what can you do to become 1% better? And so he suggests if you're trying to wake up earlier, try setting your alarm clock earlier by 1 minute every day. Or if you're trying to be healthier, try washing your hands a couple more times a day. And it talks about how these tiny little changes build up in aggregate and have this sort of exponential effect once you put them all into play. He also talks about a really fascinating, I probably can't find the picture, but he talks about a very fascinating concept that I found really helpful in terms of my habit building, which is that we expect progress with habit building to be a linear climb, but really it's more of an exponential curve. And the disparity between our linear expectations and the exponential curves he refers to as the valley of despair. And he says that most people give up there because they think, I've been doing this for several weeks and nothing's changing. But he says if you push through that, you will start to see the changes happen and they will really take off. So if you are looking to improve your life and build some new habits and actually want to succeed, this is a really good book. I can't recommend this one enough. That's everything I have today.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was fantastic. I really appreciate it, and you're wonderful as always. I'll be the next person presenting books at the moment. And the first book I want to present is Annette Gordon Reads on Juneteenth. Oh, look, I need to mirror my screen. I can actually do that from this.
It's actually right, David. It's perfect. It looks wrong to you, but it's good for us.
There you go. Learn something new every day. All right, this is Annette Gordon Reads on Juneteenth. She won a Pulitzer for her work on Thomas Jefferson and the Hemingses of Monticello. This was also a New York Times Editor's Choice recently. I thought this was it's a very, very thin book. It's a super quick read, but she comes to history through, and she sort of combines history with memoir. And it's a real look at sort of the history of American racism through the prism of Texas, where she's from. She integrated her grade school as a student from Conroe, Texas. And she combines all these different elements. There's family history there. And ultimately, it becomes a really, really moving book, too. And it's sort of on the heels of the campaign to make Juneteenth a national holiday. She talks about how it's important to her and her family and to the people as a whole. And then, as I said, it goes through specifically Texas history. It's one of the best books I've read about Texas. I lived there for a while. And she talks about sort of the first Black man in Texas, and then sort of marches up sort of through time to the present day. And I really think everyone should read it. It's a fabulous little book. The next book I'd like to recommend is, I think it's called Gastro Obscura. I think this is the best, my favorite coffee table format book this year. It's from the Astro Obscura people who have the website, and they had their their book about sort of strange places around the world, but this is strange food from around the world. It's a great successor to sort of the classic in that genre, Unmentionable Cuisine. It's beautifully illustrated. There's images all over the place. Every page, every entry from around the world has a little short essay with it, a couple of pictures, also a description of sort of where to find the thing. There are, simple things that you would, Senegalese egg rolls, but there's also a lot of gross food in here that I like to read about, would never dream of eating. Some of the things are like fermented birds sewed up in a seal skin and left, in the tundra to ferment for, a few years. There's a kind of pecorino cheese in Italy that's actually got maggots in it. That's one of the few one of the few foods that they suggest you not eat for health reasons. Though they do say you can get it in places. There's all kinds of, there's, carved caribou lard, all kinds of interesting, it's just been sitting out on my coffee table. I've got a little bookmark in it. I'm just sort of very slowly going through it and really enjoying it. It's just a fantastic gift book for anyone that likes sort of weird food. The next book I've got to recommend, it's Paul Griffith's Mr. Beethoven. We hosted Paul for an event that was a really charming event. And Claire mentioned sort of the Nobleman's Guide being sort of softer historical fiction. This is the hardest historical fiction that I've read. Not in a difficult way, but let me describe it. So Griffiths, as you may know, Beethoven died a long time ago. But Griffiths, for this book, he takes historical examples and makes Beethoven live just a little bit longer. So besides that one fact, everything else is very much versed in history. The Haydn and Handel Society of Boston did try to commission Beethoven to write an oratorio on a biblical theme. Nothing happened with it. But the principle of this book, the idea is that Beethoven lived, crossed the Atlantic, and then did write an oratorio based on the book of Job. And so one of the things that's so interesting, I think, about this is that Griffith sort of almost in a Oulipo fashion, like the French novelist that wrote a novel without the letter E, he puts up all of these sort of roadblocks that create much more difficulty for him as a writer, but then sort of generate strange things. So everything, for instance, that Beethoven says in the book actually comes from his letters or his day books of conversations. So for instance, Beethoven meets a young girl from the Cape Cod area who they pioneered an early version of American Sign Language. And so he learned sign language and encounters all these people that were historical figures in the music of Boston. There's sort of a stuffy librettist that Beethoven, takes the libretto and fixes it. It's really charming. I don't recommend it necessarily for a historical fiction reader. I think you have to have sort of predisposed to have an interest in Beethoven and classical music. There's like a little run-in parts. So young Melville comes in here. Thoreau goes to the premiere, and then Griffith sort of imagines what this music of Beethoven might have been, the music that he wrote after the Ninth Symphony and the Great Fugue and all the late Beethoven things. It's a real charmer. I enjoyed it a lot. The next book I've got is a sort of a strange one. This is a French book translated from the French called Trump Speak by Bérengère Viennot. And it distinguishes itself from the other huge shelf of Donald Trump books because Viennot is a professional political translator. Her job is translating presidential speeches. So she had spent 8 years translating Obama speeches. And then she writes this book about, what do you do now translating Trump? And so she sort of tries to sort of figure out, talks about as a professional translator, how do you translate, shithole country or something like that. So, she talks about what do you do in that case, and how do you translate, sort of the sexist things that he says. And she sort of, covers all of the things that, we may have encountered here or there or thought about But it's this very startling, interesting perspective that she brings. Again, it's a really fun, intellectually stimulating book from sort of a hard linguistic background and in translation. The next book I'd like to talk about, it's a new book from, or a more recent book from the New York Review Book Classics. This is William Gardner Smith's The Stone Face. Smith was a Black American writer, out of print as NYRB classics tend to be for a long time. This was written in 1963, published in 1963. It follows a Black man that comes to France named Simeon. He's an expat and falls into the Parisian expat society there. And he's, immediately, sort of people are looking at him and then they're so nice to him. He's, come from America. He had to run away he left the United States because of racism. And we sort of find, the history of that and what happened to him sort of piecemeal throughout the novel. And so he's sort of confronted with the fact that he's got all this more freedom. He has all this more respect from people. But as this is happening, he sort of falls in with a group of Algerians. And so it's a real look at how the French might not be, racist against American Black people, but they are still racist against Algerians. The novel concludes with the, really terrible 1961 massacre of Algerians perpetrated by the French police department that wasn't even, sort of publicly admitted to until just about 10 years ago. It's a really harrowing book. But it's a quick read. It's another book that's been rescued by NYRB, and I think it's a contemporary classic. It's a real shame that it was forgotten, but it's a powerful novel. The guy's he's a journalist and a painter, and The Stone Face comes from this painting, this portrait he makes of a person that blinded him as a young man. The next book I'd like to read, Rachel read this one too. It's Miriam Toews' Fight Night. I thought this was just about my favorite novel of the year. Toews, a few years back, wrote Women Talking, which I also really loved. It was a sort of formally inventive, challenging novel. This one, it's just sheer fun, I think. It's just gorgeous, and it's got a great voice. It's narrated by Swiv, who's a 9-year-old girl. She's kind of foul-mouthed. She lives with her mother, who's very pregnant, and her grandmother, and she spends most of her time taking care of her grandmother. She's been kicked out of school for fighting, Swiv has, and she's picked up her language from her mother. And the first half of the book or so is just sort of developing these characters, developing this family of these three women. It's a really sort of wonderful description of these people. And it's just a sort of heartwarming book, and each one of them is just one of the most beautifully crafted characters that I've encountered this year. The grandmother, Elvira, is just an irrepressibly wonderful person. Swiv is amazing, and then you really develop love for this mother who's 9 months pregnant almost, and she's at the end of her rope. The husband's nowhere, and we find out eventually what goes on. It's sort of the mystery of the book. And man, it's just this wonderful portrait of this sort of matrilineal family, and it is it's just a killer. I recommend it just by everybody. The next book I'd like to read is another one we hosted for an event, and that's Michael Pollan's This Is Your Mind on Plants. Rachel, when she was introducing Pollan, said he was one of the most influential writers or thinkers of our generation, for changing how we eat, how we think about these things. In the last few years, he's been working on psychedelics. And this book isn't really so much about that. It's about 3 different plants specifically. It's in 3 sections. I read it after the event. I found it super fascinating. The first section's on opium. It's a piece that he wrote initially in the 90s from the heights of the drug war, in which he started growing poppies in his own garden, made some tea out of them, and subsequently got super paranoid because it was inspired by a fellow who was a super underground publisher, Opium for the Masses at the time. Then the guy gets arrested. And so this is Pollan's writing this. As he's writing this piece, it's published in Harper's. He sort of freaks out. And then he actually removed some of the parts from the essay, and then he's restored them here. The last section is on mescaline. It's an interesting part about the cactus. But I think by far the most interesting and really engaging part that I think about all the time, really, now that I've read it, is the section, the middle section on caffeine. And it is, Holland, he's doing things, and so he tries the drugs, but with caffeine, he decides he's going to go cold turkey and quit it. And he worries about how he is as a writer. Does anyone care? But what's really fascinating, I think his main point in here is that caffeine really transformed Europe and was one of the major engines in the Industrial Revolution. Before caffeine, before tea, before people are drinking those things, water is generally contaminated everywhere. So people aren't drinking that. People are drinking beer all the time, or other kinds of liquor. And so they're drunk most of the day, or partially drunk. And so caffeine or coffee being boiled means that people can drink it, and without water, without being sick. And so it increases productivity. It creates the Industrial Revolution. There's it allows it to happen. People, operating those super fast machines, and so they're going to cut all their fingers off if they're not drinking, if they're too drunk. And so it's an interesting sort of look at how this plant, all these plants, have really sort of transformed our notion of civilization, or what we know. There's there's a lot of talk in there. For instance, he talks about how the coffee break becomes instituted. There are certain GM or something like that. They have they provide coffee, or maybe one doesn't provide coffee, or maybe they're not paid. And so it's sort of these things that create, but it really helps the productivity of people's work. And I think it's just a really fascinating book, just like Cook, just like Botany of Desire. It's really good, fast read, and particularly the caffeine part. I believe it was also, that part was published individually as a little small section initially before the book. The next book I'm gonna present, I just got a copy of it. It's coming out next week, next Tuesday. It's called Black Ivy. It's a book on fashion, not something I normally read. A revolt in style. It's got this great picture of Miles Davis on the cover. This is a new art book, and it is a look at how Black men in the 1940s and the 1960s, jazz musicians, civil rights activists, artists, sort of took what was the sort of the style, the fashion sense of a dominant class of white men, the ivy or the preppy look, and make it their own, and revolt, and then transform it a little bit and make it their own. And it's just a gorgeous book. Thelonious Monk's in here, Muhammad Ali, Dr. King, Malcolm X, and it's really gorgeous. And it's a great look at clothes, and the sort of the three-piece suit, the tie. It takes all these things, and it's just a really, really fascinating book, and a really interesting sort of way of thinking about fashion that had never occurred to me before. He says that this sort of style that was prevalent from the 40s to the mid 60s, Black Ivy, as they call it, was really sort of unseated by the Black Panthers, who moved to the beret and leather jacket, and then also the hippie movement sort of transformed this style. But I just thought it was great. It made me think of a wonderful essay by the art critic John Berger called "The Suit and the Photograph," in which he discusses how the traditional Western European suit is a symbol of sedentary power, someone sitting down. Not you can't move your arm much higher than this if you're wearing a jacket. And so it's sort of something that to sit around, and it's a really fascinating book. It comes out next Tuesday. Almost done here. The next book I'm going to talk about is Lauren Groff's Matrix. Many of you probably have read this before. I love Lauren Groff, Fates and Furies, Florida. This is her novelization of the life of Marie de France, who we don't really know much about his poems. But this is a great work of artistic imagination and creativity, I think. Imagining this life of this woman, Marie. Again, it's mostly out of, and there's not really much historical evidence one way or the other, so Groff invents everything. And she invents an amazing medieval feminist who takes being put into a nunnery, one of your few options as a woman during the time, and she really makes the best of it, transforms completely this abbey, and just takes it over. And there's not even a man in the book that has a name. It's all of these women, and it's just an amazing evocation of the power of women, and a great work of imagination. I can't recommend this enough. It's probably my second favorite novel of the year. Just a couple things left. This is a philosophical art history book by Stuart Jeffries called Everything, All the Time, Everywhere, How We Became Postmodern. I'm not a fan of postmodernism, but I was interested in this book. Jeffries wrote a study of the Frankfurt School a few years back that did better than anyone expected it to, about Walter Benjamin and Adorno. And this sets up, defines postmodernism initially as the sort of artistic wing of capitalist neoliberalism, as a really conservative thing. Each chapter takes marches through history from the mid-70s to the present day and looks at different facets of postmodernism through certain things. David Bowie, Madonna, Jeff Koons' Rabbit, which used to be on the cover. You got this great postmodern cover. There's Nixon here with big googly eyes. It starts with Nixon and his removal of the gold standard. And so each chapter sort of takes one of these interesting things that there's, Netflix is in here, all kinds of interesting qualities, all kinds of interesting things that he sort of says are really how we got here, and transcends any philosophy, art history. And I talked with our buyer, where would we put this book in the bookstore? It's a really tricky one. I suggested art history. I don't know if it's the best. 20th century history, something like that. It's a really readable, sort of theory-heavy, but fascinating study of the recent past and the recent past in culture. 2 books left. Speaking of our buyer, I often get a lot of grief from my colleagues about weird books I read. But sometimes I do it just to amuse myself or horrify them. And this is the one I saw on a catalog and just couldn't help but read. It's called A Cultural Biography of the Prostate. It's a wonderful cover here with this manicule of a finger pointed at the O by Erica Johnson. It's from MIT Press, and it's a funny book. I read it with a tongue firmly planted in cheek. But ultimately, it's really smart and really interesting. We haven't sold a single copy of it. So if anyone wants to order it, go ahead. I wonder why, and art and comparative literature. And one of the things I really found interesting about this book is how literary theory has sort of colonized and seeped into everything else and so many different disciplines in sort of medical history. I wish this book, it displays a real warmth, humor, and intellectual sophistication, a progressive intersectionality. She talks about bodies with prostates that I wish all medical practitioners could exhibit. She looks at the historical associations and the cultural ones of the prostate. She looks at how it was quote unquote discovered in 1536. She looks at historical treatments for bad prostates. These things included belladonna suppositories, electrical probes, castration, and the only urethral terrors, I think is the right word. Maybe not a medical word, but I think it really gets to the idea of it. There are pictures of 18th century wax models. She talks about YouTube videos that are educational, informative. She looks at, people's shame about it, people's wanting to, the sort of the jokes about, when you go see your proctologist. But, really, it's got a warm center in addition to sort of the humor of it. It's sort of, she looks at, how do we talk about healthy bodies versus sick bodies? It ends with a discussion of how the infrastructure of the city, of where we live, as a white man, we see the world as made for us, but it's different when you have to urinate more, and you discover that the infrastructure is really designed for healthy white men. It's a truly fascinating read, from what Victorian doctors thought, did, if prostates were bad because of, non-normative sexual practices or something like that. It's really interesting sort of about its presence in our culture, or even, as she says, its presence even when absent. She calls it a gland that haunts. Real fun book. I recommend it. Last book I want to recommend, not out yet, it's coming out, it's just a quick forerunner, coming out in March. If anyone likes speaking about music, Steve Reich, the composer, called Our Greatest Living Composer by the New York Times, wrote music for 18 musicians and drumming. This is a book of his that came out instead of a memoir. It's called Conversations, inspired by Stravinsky's books of conversations with Robert Kraft. Reich, during the pandemic, has the conversations with a whole host of interesting musical people, second generation of minimalist composers, the Bang on a Can people, Brian Eno, who was the proponent of ambient music and was a rocker too, conductors, musicians that he met, the sculptor, Richard Serra, Johnny Greenwood, the guitarist from Radiohead. It's a very fascinating book. I recommend it only if you, not even if you like classical music, particularly maybe if you like modernist classical music or that stuff. Really fascinating, runs through his career. It's a little bit more interesting than I think a memoir that just goes from the beginnings to the end. But also you get a real taste for these other people. There's a lot of give and take with the other composers. All right, everybody, those are my books, my weird books. Thanks.
Thank you, David. I always love hearing about your weird books and have gotten some incredible recommendations from you, so I appreciate it. I broke my list up today to sort of talk a little bit about books for different types of readers that you might be looking to gift this holiday season or be looking for yourself. So first up is a picture book, which is my favorite picture book of the year. This is Wishes. It is, I'm not sure the art is truly going to come through the screen, but I'm going to just show you a couple of spreads because it is so incredibly beautiful. It is very simple. It is a story of a refugee family leaving Vietnam, and each page is telling it from the point of view of a different object or creature or person and what they wish for. So it starts off with the night wished it was quieter. And goes from there. So there is our wishes from the clock, there are wishes from the sea, there are wishes from the dog. It made me cry, and it is to me one of the really perfect examples of what a picture book can do, where the art and the text are enforcing each other in these really incredible ways. So I would not say it's a picture book for like a toddler. It's much more of a preschooler and up picture book, even though there are very, very few words per page. There's also, and I really appreciated this, the text is very simple. Each page has only a few words, but there's a pretty thorough author's note at the end, which has the author and artist telling a little bit about their own biography. And the author is a refugee who came to the United States as a child from Vietnam. So that's something that if you were sharing this with an older child, you could share with them. A younger child, you might choose what to share and what not to share. But this is really my favorite picture book of the year, and it is Wishes. And the author, I'm probably getting this pronunciation wrong, but it's Nguyen Thi Van is the author. So next up is moving a little bit older, a graphic novel that I would say is sort of middle grade, ideal for 3rd through 6th grade, probably mostly the older end of that, but certainly a precocious 3rd grader would be fine. It's called The Big Apple Diaries, and it's by Alyssa Bermudez, and it is graphic memoir. So Bermudez wrote this book based on her own notebooks and sketchbooks and diaries from her middle school years when she was growing up in New York City at the time of 9/11. So it is partially just regular teenager, I'm in middle school and I have crushes on boys and I'm not sure I like how my eyebrows look. And partially, partway through in this very normal teenage middle school story, September 11th happens, she's at school. Her parents actually both work at or near the World Trade Center. So it's following her in that time period also. And it is beautifully done, especially for a generation of kids who, this is history for them. This happened before they were born and they don't really understand it. So giving them a child's eye view, exactly as it happened for a kid who was also in the midst of, I have my first crush and I don't know what to do about my eyebrows. So I thought it was really beautifully done and very thoughtfully written. Great for kids who, are reading Raina Telgemeier, who are reading any of the sort of really popular great graphic novels out there. This is sort of the perfect book for them. And then also in middle reader, but for a very different sort of kid, The Beatrice Prophecy by Kate DiCamillo. Kate DiCamillo is a beloved author for young people. Her books are always beautiful and loving and thoughtful. The Beatrice Prophecy has a very fairy tale-like feeling, and I don't have a copy of it, I'm sorry. I have been on a book lending binge lately, so a lot of the books that I'm talking about today I don't have here at home. I keep wanting people to read them. But The Beatrice Prophecy is a young girl appears at a monastery with a goat. She is injured, she has very little memory of what brought her there, and the goat won't leave her. And the brothers take her in, and it comes to pass that there is a prophecy about her and she is in danger, and it is up to her to save the kingdom through the power of story. It is told in very simple language, but it is a complicated book. So I would say that you would want to give it to a fairly sophisticated reader, but it is one of the more beautiful and joyful books that I read this year. It also has beautiful illustrations throughout by the picture book illustrator, Sophie Blackall. So even though it is a middle grade chapter book, it has beautiful full page illustrations interspersed throughout. Again, to give it that feeling of a very luxurious fairy tale book. So that was a great one. And then moving on to books for teenagers, I have 3 suggestions. Again, only one of which I have here today because I am on a book lending binge. First up is In the Same Boat by Holly Green. This is a debut that came out this year that I think did not get nearly as much attention as it deserves. It is set over the course of a 250-mile canoe race. And the main character is a girl whose family does this canoe race every year, but she's basically been kicked off the team by her dad. And she feels like that's because she got hurt last year and he's decided she's not good enough. And she wants to prove herself to him. She wants to go out and do it on her own with a different team and win. And this is a grueling, 52 hours without sleeping, without stopping. You pull over briefly to grab a little bit of food. At the start of the race, there is an accident. Her boat is damaged and she winds up having to go in a different boat with her ex-best friend, who is a boy who she also has some feelings for, but who they are basically bitter rivals and haven't spoken in quite some time. So they're having to compete in this race together, the sort of heightened emotions of this incredibly physically difficult thing. And I was just blown away by the suspense of it and how well it captured that, what it's like to do something that is deeply hard. And I feel like that's not something that teenagers always get in their literature. And I really appreciated this book for that. So that's In the Same Boat by Holly Green. And then next up, another young adult debut. This one we hosted a virtual launch event for. The author is local to Saratoga. It is Dangerous Play by Emma Kress. This is a wonderful sports novel for teenagers. The main character is the captain of her field hockey team. She has been sort of trying to build a team that's going to do really well this year and propel her to be recruited to various colleges. She really wants to go, I think, to UNC, and she wants to be recruited there. At the end of the summer, she goes to a party and a boy attempts to rape her. And she has to respond to that, has to figure out she's not okay, and proceeds with a group of girls from the team to sort of proceed into this space of almost vigilante justice, where they're not seeking revenge, but they're looking to be vigilantes out protecting the other girls in the school, which goes poorly in the ways one might expect that to go poorly and in ways that one might not expect that to go poorly. But it's a really amazing look at girls reclaiming their power and finding ways to do that that are both productive and not productive, and then working out the balance of that. It is just beautifully written, incredibly powerful. One of those books that I wish I had had when I was a teenage girl. I wish that some writer had been whispering these words in my ear. I feel like it's really important, a really important book. So that's Dangerous Play by Emma Kress. And then next on my list is Some Girls Do by Jennifer Dugan. Dugan is a wonderful author of sort of sweet, funny, queer teen romantic comedies. So Some Girls Do follows a girl who's been basically kicked out of her private school for being gay. And she's in a new town at a new school and figuring things out, trying to get permission to be on the track team there, which she's been quite a track star. I guess sports are a theme of my teen books this time. And she's quite smitten by a girl who is one of the competes in beauty pageants, somewhat against her will, and also fixes up antique cars. And it's just a very sweet, gentle romance. The beauty queen is not out at all and not comfortable being out. And of course, there's a lot of conflict there, but it is very thoughtfully and well done. So that is Some Girls Do by Jennifer Dugan. And then my last YA book is actually nonfiction. That is Fallout by Steve Schenken, which we also hosted an event for. A lot of my reading is dictated by our events. So this one is a fantastic nonfiction Cold War thriller. So sort of think John le Carré, but all true and written for teens. So this really follows the everything that's leading up to and including the Cuban Missile Crisis. So it's the drama of the Cold War and what is going on in the world around espionage and, big nuclear showdowns, face-offs. So that is Fallout by Steve Schenken. It also has a great storyline of following everything that's going on in divided Berlin, which was absolutely fascinating. Lots of history that I hadn't known before I read this one. And then moving on, so that's sort of my kids and young people. And then I have a couple of romance recommendations, a couple of fantasy recommendations, and a couple of literary fiction recommendations, all for adults. So for romance, the first one on the list is The Queer Principles of Kit Webb. This is a gay romance set in 1700 England in a coffee shop. Thank you, David, for mentioning coffee shops and their cultural importance earlier when you were talking about the Michael Pollan book. Kit Webb is a retired highwayman who has gone clean and is now running a coffee shop in London. And there is a young lordling who is looking to get revenge on his father and walks into the coffee shop one day because he needs Kit Webb to help him orchestrate one last highway robbery. It is silly and delightful and a little on the steamy end of the romance spectrum, but extremely well done. It's a lovely, fun gay highway robbery novel, which really, what more could you want? And then next up, actually, similarly, historical romance with gay people and crime, because I guess that's my other theme other than sports books for teens. Olivia Waite's The Hellions Waltz. So this is a lesbian romance set in England. In a little bit later, it's more, I think, 1800s, where one of the young women has just moved to a small town and she is basically recovering from having been the victim of a con artist. And she's really struggling with that emotionally. She meets another woman who she's quite intrigued by, but who seems to be engaged in some sort of con of her own. And that is a source of great conflict, but it turns out that it's very much about union organizing and workers' rights for a group of weavers in this small town in England. So it is very beautifully done. It's bringing in a lot of British social history into this one book, while also being sort of a sweet, nice romance. So that is The Hellions Waltz by Olivia Waite. So those are my two romance suggestions. And then next up, some fantasy. The first book on my list there is probably my favorite book that I've read this year. It is called A Marvelous Light by Freya Marsk. And it actually has a lot in common with the historical romances that I was talking about, but there's magic. So it is categorized as fantasy. A young lord has, he's just inherited his father's baronetcy, but there's no money there. It's completely bankrupt. And so he needs to get a job. And he goes out and gets a civil service job, is put into what everyone thinks is going to be the most boring dead-end job that there could be. But it turns out that that job is actually liaison to magical Britain. So unbeknownst to him or most non-magical people, there is a whole society of magical England out there that is hidden. And he is now the liaison. But of course, there's a deadly plot in the works, and he and his magical counterpart, with whom sparks fly, have to go out and fix the problem and solve the mystery. So it's a really fun ride. It's very fast-paced, a lot of fun, very sweet, and that is A Marvelous Light. It's set in Edwardian England, so early 1900s. There are motor cars, but they're not the only way of getting around, and it's really well researched with the historical setting, except for the magic. And then two books, my other fantasy recommendation, I'm going to talk about these together because they are a series and you definitely do want to read them in order. So the first book in the series is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. And then the second book in the series is The Last Graduate. Book 3 in the series is not out yet. It is coming. I have been promised it is written, but I haven't seen a date yet for its release, which is bad because The Last Graduate ends on a terrible cliffhanger and I'm in great suspense. But these books are set in a magical school that exists in the void outside of the real world, where magical children are sent off to this school because it is safer than the real world, even though it is not very safe. There are all of these horrible magical beasts in the world who kill magical children in order to take their magic. And they are safer in this teacherless, adultless school in the void than elsewhere, but there are still a lot of these bad animals, creatures that get in and kill them there. The survival rate is pretty abysmal, actually, wherever you are, but they're better off there. And the narrator of both of these books of the series is a teenager named Galadriel, who is her affinity, what she's meant to be, is a dark sorceress. But she has been raised by her mother to be good and to know that she can't become a dark sorceress. And so she is trying to survive this school and trying not to let it turn her into the dark sorceress that she is meant to be. And she becomes friends with a boy at the school whose sole purpose in life is to kill these monsters. He is the great hero. So we have the great hero and the great villain who have to come together to try to save the kids in the school. And it is brilliantly done. Galadriel is a deeply snarky narrator, so she's very funny and very relatable. And the books are just a total roller coaster. Each one, when I got the advanced reader's copy, it was a day of, I don't want anyone to bother me. All I'm going to do is read these books. So it is a fabulous series. The Last Graduate just came out this fall. So it is out in hardcover. A Deadly Education is in paperback, and we don't know when we're getting the third book, but it is coming soon, I hope, because I really need it. And then my last two books I'm going to speak about this evening are two literary fiction novels, also have been lent out. The Great Circle, which many of you may have read, by Maggie Shipstead. Maggie Shipstead came to the Saratoga store a bunch of years ago now for her last book, and I really was impressed by her at that time and was excited to see The Great Circle come out. This is one that a lot of our booksellers have loved. It is two separate storylines, one of which is historical fiction following a woman pilot starting in the 1930s and going up through the 50s. So she's a young woman in Montana. She wants to learn to fly. She figures out a way to learn to fly, winds up in England flying during World War II. Women did a lot of like transporting planes around England. They wouldn't be in combat, but they'd be helping out in various pilot capacities. And then decides that she is going to circumnavigate the globe around the poles. So from pole to pole around the full circle. The Great Circle. And so that's one storyline. And the other storyline is a disgraced Hollywood starlet in the present day who has been hired to star in a biopic about the pilot. And the two storylines are woven together in a really lovely and clever way. And I really enjoyed reading this. It was a great immersive read. So that is The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. And then last of all, Radiant Fugitives, a novel by Nawaz Ahmed. We hosted him for an event this summer. It was a great one. So Radiant Fugitives is a novel that is narrated by a baby boy at the moment of his birth. And he is an omniscient narrator who can talk about decades of family history, looking back at the story of his mother, his aunt, and his grandmother, who have all, in the weeks leading up to his birth, been gathered together at the San Francisco apartment of his mother, trying to reconcile after years of difficult history. It is set during the Obama presidency, and it is a really interesting time capsule into sort of a moment in our very, very recent history. It is beautifully done. It's a Muslim immigrant family. One sister, the mother, who is giving birth, is quite progressive San Francisco politics, has really moved away from her religion. One sister is extremely traditional, very religious, living in a deeply conservative religious Muslim community in Texas. And the mother still lives in Pakistan, is just visiting, and comes from a whole different perspective. And it's really about these three women working out their family relationships. It's just beautifully written. And really, I think the literary fiction novel that I enjoyed the most this year. So that is my long list of many books. It's been really fun talking to you all about them this evening. And yes, David just posted a link in the chat to all of the books that we talked about this evening. You can order them at northshire.com, or you can give us a call in either store location or stop in. And amazingly, we timed it almost exactly right this evening. We are exactly at time, which never happens. I feel like we're always a little over or a little under. But thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Yes, thanks so much. I felt bad. I think I went over a little bit, my allotted 15 minutes, but it worked out all right. Also, last event of the 2021 is Thursday night. If anyone is interested, it's our publisher sales rep book picks night. We'll have sales reps from Hachette, from PGW, Two Rivers, and from Random House Kids. So join us that night for another free fun event, another favorite. Thanks everybody, and have a great evening.